Thank you to James and Charlie for the talks, because it was really interesting in the context of what I'm about to say to hear about people voting about the Brexit question. Because obviously people like me, who are EU nationals, whether we are short or longer term resident like me, 19 years so far and counting, were disenfranchised from the Brexit referendum. We were not allowed to vote, unlike in the referendum for the independence referendum in Scotland. We did not have a vote in the Brexit referendum, and therefore we did not have a say in its outcome. But not interestingly, actually, quite concerningly, EU nationals are, as you probably know from media coverage, one of the groups that are most affected by the result of the referendum. Because, again, as you know, the referendum was maybe not focused exclusively on, but a large part of the campaign was focused on issues such as ending freedom of movement under the European directives and, to use the phrase from the Vote Leave campaign, taking controls of our borders. Right? Not mine, the British borders. So it was a massive focus of the referendum, and of course one of the outcomes of it was that when Article 50 was triggered and when the negotiations have started, it has become very clear that despite statements, quite weak in my view, from various departments in the government that our rights are going to be protected, there followed a quite lengthy period of a lot of uncertainty, of a lot of concern, and a lot of worry, because the system under which we will be able to stay here, or we would be able to stay in the UK, was subject, and the kind of conditions of it were subject to negotiations with Brussels. And that took time from, in effect, from the results of the referendum all the way to the November 2018, when the draft withdrawal agreement was agreed with Brussels, and in it, it stated that the parties agreed that reciprocal rights, it's a legal term, reciprocal rights are going to be afforded to EU citizens living in the UK and to the UK citizens living in other EU countries. But having that in the withdrawal agreement doesn't actually guarantee anything. Well, it does guarantee various things in terms of access to certain rights, but the system under which you can claim those rights is subject to a national decision. So, and that's only in case of a deal. If there's no deal, it's a completely other scenario. I'm not going to go there because I will be really, really angry by the end of this. But if there is a deal, there are certain protections in the withdrawal agreement, but the system, as I said, is designed by the national government. So about September last year, the government started piloting what they have called the EU settlement scheme, which is probably not the name that you have heard. You're more likely to hear this being referred to as a settled status scheme. And here started the nightmare. The sort of the first testing, I was actually able to apply in the first testing stage because of being a university lecturer. Certain universities were part of that system. My application went smoothly-ish. I can tell you about that during the questions and answers. But a lot of people have found that the application process, which was based exclusively on electronically, it was done exclusively electronically. You had to have an access to Android device. It wouldn't work on Apple. There was no Apple version of all sorts of things. So it was quite a difficult phase. And there was a lot of coverage in the media, particularly in the social media, people discussing how difficult that whole process will be and how unpredictable that whole process will be. So then there was a second testing phase, which was a beta 2 phase, from the beginning of this year to about April time, to deal with some of the snags in the first system. The government claims they've got something like 200,000 applications during that time. About 190,000 of them have been accepted. But and now we're in a kind of full flow. So from May 2019 onwards, people are able to apply to that scheme to basically stay in the UK. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the technical details, we can have a conversation with that later on. But one of the things that I am going to talk about is the kind of issues or the impact that I think when people look at social media or coverage by The Guardian or The Independent in particular, that there were a lot of stories, that kind of horror stories about people not being able to evidence their eligibility, and we can have a conversation about that later on. People have been here for not just 20 years like me, but 40 or 60 years, well, 50 years, the EU doesn't exist, but about 50 years. Issues around providing documents of continuous residence, which is sort of measured against the time that you worked or lived in a certain address and what have you. So a lot of that coverage was about the kind of fundamental difficulties with the application process rather than with the concept itself and what it means in terms of taking away rights from EU nationals rather than guaranteeing rights to EU nationals under the withdrawal agreement. And I'm going to briefly talk about this now. There are certain consequences to the Brexit referendum to the situation of people like me. I have a Polish passport, always had a Polish passport. I never felt that I needed to change it. I had an indefinite leave to remain before Poland joined the EU, then I was just using my treaty rights. There was no need to apply for anything, not a residence card, not a British passport, nothing like that. I had access to all of the rights that any of you that are British citizens in this room can use, bar one, which is voting in the Westminster elections. And as it turned out, then voting in the Brexit referendum, which was a conscious decision of the government, by the way. It could have gone differently. But, so I lived like that for 20 years, or 18 years until the Brexit referendum. And then suddenly, at the time when the settlement scheme was introduced, I'm being told you have to apply. So that's the first impact. I'm being told you have to apply now, so the government lets you stay in your own home. So that was the first impact, right? This system is not a declaratory system. So the government had the opportunity and the chance to say, okay, we're going to do a registration, which I think is the 3 million, the organisation that represents EU nationals have been arguing for this for quite a while, to say, put a simple system of registration. If you want to know who's in the country, just do that, rather than an application for eligibility to stay. And the government has been reluctant to do that, partly because the process of getting a settled status includes checks on criminality, not only in the UK but also abroad, which is in fact much broader than it was before in relation to deportations of people who have committed criminal offences. So that was one thing. We had to apply to stay in our own homes, which, as you can imagine, is quite upsetting if you are well settled, if you're well integrated, and so on. So that was quite upsetting. And by the way, you have to apply regardless of how long you have been here. So even though there is a limit in terms of the minimum residence, in that you can apply if you lived here for 5 years, or if you're going to live here for 5 years before the exit date, or before the transition period, you have to apply even if you've lived here your whole life. The second impact that links to the third one is that, sorry, I'm going to run out of time, but the second impact is, when I got indefinite leave to remain in 2002, I got a physical stamp in a physical document, that was my passport, that said, I have the right to stay in this country, and I have an indefinite right to stay in this country, unless and until I really mess up, and somebody's going to put me in the plane and send me home, right? With the settled status, we don't have anything. We don't have anything. Because the letter that I got from the Home Office, which says that I have been granted the settled status, says at the bottom, this letter is not a proof of your status. So I've got the letter, but it doesn't prove anything. So from the exit date, whichever it is going to be, exit date or the end of day, which is the third impact, or the time when the potential transitional arrangements are done. If I want to buy a house, set up a bank account, go to the NHS and use the NHS, don't start me on crossing the border. And how do we explain that? I'm going to have to say, if somebody asks me, or my employer, in fact, if somebody asks me, do you have the right to stay in the UK, I'm going to have to say, do you have a computer or Wi-Fi connection and access to a Home Office database in about 3 hours? And I'm going to let you know, and you can confirm that. Because the confirmation of the status is not by document, but electronic database that is held in the Home Office. So that was the second and third impact, that because we don't have a document, unlike our non-EU brothers and sisters who are here under other immigration rules, or previously people who previously had indefinite leave to remain, this is going to be a very complex and a very complicated system. And that leads me to the fourth impact, which is there's already been anecdotal evidence long before the EU settlement system has actually kicked off, that the fact that people are not going to have a physical document, or the fact of uncertainty about what our rights are going to be and how they're going to be developed and how they're going to be asserted and so on, started leading to discrimination in access to services, in access to housing, in access to jobs. Because if you have to go through that whole procedure as a private landlord, or as a state agency or an employer or whatever, of checking the status or what have you, there is a potential, I'm not saying that the anecdotal evidence is necessarily correct, because we don't have firm evidence of that as yet. But sometimes you've got two people who have a document and not. And the reason for that is not that because people are bad people, but because employers, landlords, people in the NHS and whatever are fined if they provide any service to somebody who's in here unlawfully. So that's the fourth impact. The fifth impact is about the unlawfulness. I'm going to take just one more minute, which is that after the EU settlement scheme finishes, which again differs, the date differs between the deal and the no deal, whenever that finishes, if somebody doesn't apply by that deadline, and there are plenty of reasons we can talk about later on about why people might not be able to apply, is that they are becoming unlawful residents on that date. Now, Sajid Javid said in the Home Office inquiry in May that he didn't think they were going to be unlawful. I'm sorry, I mean, this is not an impression of Sajid Javid, sorry. I didn't mean to be rude to the Home Office Minister. But it was kind of like, he was actually saying, it's in print, he was actually saying, well, I don't think they're going to be unlawful. And then the committee asked, well, is it going to be a breach of immigration rules? And he said, well, yes, I think so. So if it is a breach of immigration rules, then you're an immigration offender. So you are here unlawfully. So there's no question about the fact that if people don't apply by the deadline, they will be made unlawful residents in this country, regardless of how long they have been here. So just to finish, I'm going to say these are just some examples of the impact of the changes to the legal status of EU citizens post-Brexit, and to kind of present the full picture of it probably would bore you for 7 hours and just 7 or 10 minutes. But I'm going to finish with this, which I found interesting. For a number of years now, we've been hearing this message from the government saying, no, you don't have anything to worry about. All your rights are going to be protected. You're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. You don't have to pack. You don't have to leave. You don't have to take your children out of school. Everything is going to be fine. And the day before yesterday, the Conservative leadership, hopeful Jeremy Hunt, once again tweeted, one thing I will not negotiate is on citizens' rights. So to put the millions of EU citizens who have made the UK their home at ease, I can reconfirm to them that the rights in the UK are protected. Hashtag has to be Hunt. Well, I want to say to Jeremy Hunt that I would love to have a confidence that that is exactly what's going to happen. As I have just said and outlined in the last few minutes, I really don't think that that's going to be the case.